Welcome to the TOEFL Listening section. In this section, you will listen to an academic lecture and then answer questions about what you heard. You may take notes while you listen. You will have time to review your notes before answering the questions. Listen to part of a lecture in a university class. You will hear the lecture only once, so listen carefully. After the lecture, you will answer some questions about what you heard. Some questions ask about the main ideas and supporting details. Other questions ask you to make inferences or connections between ideas. Answer each question based on what is stated or implied in the lecture.
Today we will examine the Columbian Exchange and why this biotic and cultural transfer reshaped the world after 1492. I use the term Columbian Exchange to refer to the large-scale movement of plants, animals, pathogens, and cultural practices between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia following European contact. This was not a single event, but an ongoing series of transfers with ecological, economic, and social consequences that unfolded over centuries. Let us start with plants. Staple crops moved in both directions, but the most dramatic effects come from New World crops in the Old World, and vice versa. The potato, native to the Andes, became central to diets in Northern Europe. Its high-calorie yield and ability to grow in poor soils supported population growth in places like Ireland and Northern England. Maize, or corn, from Mesoamerica spread to Africa and China and became a major staple in many regions because it produced more calories per acre than some traditional cereals. By contrast, the Old World introduced wheat, citrus, and sugarcane to the Americas. Sugarcane, in particular, led to the development of plantation agriculture in the Caribbean and Brazil. Animals also moved. Horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep arrived in the Americas and transformed indigenous economies and landscapes. The introduction of the horse changed mobility for many Native American groups on the Great Plains and altered hunting strategies and warfare. Pigs and cattle became feral in some places and competed with native species, an early form of invasive species dynamics caused by human-mediated biotic exchange. However, the most catastrophic transfers involved pathogens. Europeans brought smallpox, measles, and influenza to the Americas. Smallpox alone reduced some indigenous populations by as much as 80 to 90% within a century of first contact. Those disease effects triggered social collapse in some polities, weakened resistance to colonial conquest, and reshaped demographic patterns across the hemisphere. At the same time, syphilis likely traveled from the Americas to Europe. The exchange of disease was therefore reciprocal, but asymmetrical in impact. Beyond biology, there were cultural transfers. Foods, culinary practices, and crops influenced cuisines, from Mexico to Beijing. Chocolate derived from cacao became a luxury in Europe and eventually an everyday product. Tobacco became a cash commodity that shaped colonial economies. The Columbian Exchange also had environmental consequences. Deforestation in the Caribbean to make room for sugar plantations altered soils and local climates. Soils degraded in some plantation zones and new agroecological systems emerged that depended on intensive labor inputs. Those labor demands contributed to the large-scale movement of enslaved Africans to the Americas. While the slave trade is a distinct historical subject, it must be seen as intertwined with the ecological and economic imperatives created by the Columbian Exchange. We can draw three broad conclusions about the Columbian Exchange. First, it was transformative for diets and demographics. Second, it produced unequal outcomes, favoring Old World population growth while devastating many indigenous societies. Third, its ecological effects were long-term. Invasive species, new disease environments, and altered land use patterns continue to shape ecosystems today. To illustrate, consider the contrast between Ireland and the Caribbean. In Ireland, the potato helped sustain a growing population until the 19th century. In the Caribbean, sugar plantations based on New World climate suitability produced wealth, but also environmental damage and a brutal labor system. In closing, historians and ecologists call the Columbian Exchange one of the most consequential biotic events in human history. It reveals how human movements create lasting ecological and cultural change. When we study this exchange, we should pay attention to both biological vectors and cultural practices, and to who gained and who suffered in the processes that followed contact.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Smallpox alone reduced some indigenous populations by as much as 80 to 90% within a century of first contact.
This concludes the listening section. For more TOEFL practice tests and study materials, visit Spinta.org.